The lights were too bright. The set was too loud, and somewhere beneath the painted smirk of Gotham's insanity, a real-life feud was brewing. Quiet at first, but sharp as a blade waiting in a velvet box, Tommy Lee Jones stood beneath the hot glare of a studio lamp, skin lacquered in Two-Face prosthetics, his gravitas buried beneath garish pinks and purples. Across the soundstage, Jim Carrey spun like a human sparkler, bouncing between takes, tossing off one-liners with the energy of a live wire set loose in a toy store. The cameras might have loved it. The kids definitely would. But Jones, he seethed. This wasn't acting, he thought. This wasn't craft. This was circus. And then one night, off-set, away from the costumes and choreography, it snapped. A quiet restaurant, a chance encounter. Jim Carrey trying to break the ice, a smile, a handshake, and Tommy Lee Jones, pale with rage, shaking with control, stared him in the face and said with chilling clarity, "I hate you. I really don't like you. I cannot sanction your buffoonery." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a performance. It was personal. This is the story of Tommy Lee Jones and the actor he hated most. Not with theatrical flair, but with the cold-blooded disdain of a man who saw his art turning into something he didn't recognize, or worse, didn't respect. Welcome to the set of Batman Forever, where Two-Face and the Riddler weren't just enemies on screen. Chapter 1. The Build-Up. In 1995, Batman Forever was poised to be a spectacle. Joel Schumacher's vision ditched the brooding gothic textures of Tim Burton's Batman for something brighter, louder, and more kinetic. Gotham was now fluorescent. The Batmobile glowed. The villains, larger than life. And so were the actors chosen to portray them. Tommy Lee Jones had just come off an Oscar win for The Fugitive. He was at the peak of his critical acclaim, a respected figure known for his commanding presence and no-nonsense discipline. He was a man of the theater, a Harvard graduate, a craftsman of restraint. Casting him as Two-Face was a bold move, because in Jones, intensity was never lacking. But subtlety was his strength, not cartoonish villainy. Then came Jim Carrey, already a superstar thanks to Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. Carrey was the opposite of Jones in every way. Where Jones was stoic, Carrey was a hurricane of motion. He treated his face like a rubber band, his voice like a firework. And for Schumacher's neon-soaked version of Gotham, Carrey's manic energy as the Riddler was a perfect fit, at least on paper. From the very beginning, something about Carrey grated on Jones. It wasn't jealousy. Jones had no need for envy. It wasn't exactly contempt either. It was more elemental than that. A kind of allergic reaction, as if Tommy Lee Jones saw in Jim Carrey everything he felt was wrong with the direction of film, acting, and fame itself. A loudness, a silliness, a sacrilege. Carrey, ever the extrovert, seemed unaware at first. He admired Jones, grew up watching him. He thought they were colleagues, perhaps even soon-to-be friends, but the air between them never warmed. And then came the night. They weren't on set. They weren't in costume. They were simply two men, stars orbiting the same sky, meeting by chance at a high-end restaurant. Carrey spotted him first. He approached with the openness of someone looking to connect, perhaps to diffuse the unspoken tension, or maybe just to say hello. But Tommy Lee Jones was not in the mood for pleasantries. As Carrey would later describe in interviews, Jones's face drained of color the moment he saw him. His hands trembled. His voice, when it came, was even and unrelenting. "I hate you. I really don't like you." And then came the line. So formal, so strange, so brutal, it became immortal. "I cannot sanction your buffoonery." Not, "I don't get your comedy," not, "I don't care for your work," but "I cannot sanction your buffoonery," like a judge laying down a sentence. Carrey was stunned. Not offended, necessarily. He had weathered plenty of criticism before. But this was different. This wasn't about taste. This was about something deeper, a rejection of his very essence. And from that moment on, the line was drawn. 2 actors, 1 set, and an invisible wall between them, thick as steel. Chapter 2. Professions in Contrast. To understand why Tommy Lee Jones's disdain ran so deep, you have to look beyond the incident to who these men were and what they represented. Tommy Lee Jones was the embodiment of classical American drama. He approached acting like sculpture, chisel by chisel, shaping character with precision, gravitas, and restraint. Every pause, every narrowed glance, every syllable was considered. He wasn't there to entertain. He was there to inhabit. His work had weight, built on years of theater, study, and reverence for the craft. He had worked with Al Pacino, Sissy Spacek, and Meryl Streep. He was molded in the tradition of realism and psychological depth. Tommy Lee Jones didn't play characters. He became them, and he expected the same level of respect and commitment from those who shared the stage with him. Jim Carrey was a comet, flaming, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. By 1995, he was Hollywood's crown prince of comedy, commanding $20 million a film. But he wasn't just a funny man. He was a shapeshifter, a walking cartoon, a force of nature whose performances were as much about body language and improvisation as they were about dialogue. For Carrey, spontaneity was the craft. It was rooted in instinct, in flow, in trusting the chaos. He could become anyone, The Mask, Ace Ventura, Lloyd Christmas, and still hold an audience in the palm of his hand. There was genius in his madness, but to someone like Tommy Lee Jones, it didn't look like artistry. It looked like indulgence. They were, in essence, 2 different languages trying to speak the same scene. When the camera rolled on Batman Forever, Jones delivered his lines with a measured roar, grounding his Two-Face in volcanic fury. Carrey, by contrast, exploded into every scene as if the laws of physics didn't apply to him. He danced, he screeched, he stretched the tone of the film with every take. The result was visually electric, but emotionally off balance. It was said that Carrey tried, on set, to win Jones over. He toned himself down between scenes, offered pleasantries, even cracked less often in Jones's presence. But the energy never thawed. It remained stiff, like a forced family photo at Christmas where the cousins barely speak. Jones never yelled, never complained. But his silence was thunderous, a wall Carrey could never climb. And as the shoot wore on, the divide became emblematic of a larger tension in Hollywood at the time, between the old guard of method and structure and the rising tide of spectacle, improvisation, and charisma, between actors who trained in darkness and actors who thrived in light. Tommy Lee Jones saw himself as a torchbearer of dignity and performance. Jim Carrey was the wild flame, dancing above it, threatening to burn the whole theater down just for the thrill of it. In another life, they might have admired each other. But in this one actor could not sanction the other's buffoonery, and the other would never forget it. Chapter 3. Reveal-driven moments the public would never have known. Not at first. Batman Forever hit theaters in June 1995. A kaleidoscope of chaotic visuals and over-the-top performances. Critics were divided, but audiences showed up in droves. The film grossed over $330 million worldwide. Carrey, in particular, was praised for his magnetic Riddler, another jewel in his already blinding crown. And Tommy Lee Jones? He was solid. He did what he always did. He delivered. His Two-Face was manic and monstrous, albeit overshadowed by Carrey's larger-than-life energy. And despite the volcanic tension off camera, no one could see a crack in the facade on screen. But behind the scenes, whispers began to circulate. Crew members noticed the chill. Some would say you could feel the friction when both men were in the same room. A subtle, electric stillness, like static just before a storm. They didn't talk. They didn't eat together. They certainly didn't laugh together. Years later, the truth emerged. Not in exposés or scandal, but through Carrey's own recollections. He spoke about the encounter at the restaurant in multiple interviews, always with a kind of stunned amusement, not bitterness, not anger, just disbelief. A surreal anecdote that stuck with him like a splinter beneath the skin. Carrey would later say, "I walked into the restaurant, and the maitre d' said, 'You're working with Tommy Lee Jones, aren't you?' I said, 'Yeah, I am.' He said, 'He's in the corner, having dinner.' I said, 'Oh, great, I'll go say hi.' And I went over and I said, 'Hey Tommy, how are you?' And the blood just drained from his face. He got up, kind of shaking, and hugged me and said, 'I hate you. I really don't like you. I cannot sanction your buffoonery.' It wasn't a joke. He wasn't smiling. He meant every word. The moment became infamous. Not just because it was shocking, but because it was so utterly Tommy Lee Jones. Who else could insult someone with such unshakable formality? Who else could reject not just a person, but the essence of their creative existence? And yet, Carrey didn't fire back. He never retaliated with anger or gossip. If anything, he seemed to wear it as a badge of bizarre honor, proof that his presence had been impossible to ignore. For Jones, it was more than a personality clash. It was an existential conflict, a fundamental disagreement about what acting was supposed to be. To Jones, Carrey's style was an affront to the discipline he had spent decades perfecting. To Carrey, Jones's coldness was a missed opportunity for camaraderie, maybe even mentorship. But there was never going to be reconciliation. No behind-the-scenes handshake. No understanding forged over coffee. Their differences weren't surface level. They were philosophical. And they played out, silently, beneath the neon lights of a soundstage dressed as Gotham City. Chapter 4. Flashback and Fallout. Imagine it. The makeup chair. Early morning call times. Tommy Lee Jones sitting stoically, layers of prosthetic being applied to half his face, hour after hour. The silence around him thick, broken only by the soft hum of hair dryers and the occasional muttered line rehearsal. His eyes locked into a distant place. Not in the script, but in the idea of what acting used to mean. What it should mean. Across the trailer, a different world was unfolding. Jim Carrey burst through the door like a living cartoon, his energy uncontainable even at 6 a.m. He jokes with the crew, improvises sound effects, contorts his body in a silent rehearsal of mayhem. Everyone laughs. The tension lightens, but not at Jones's station. His shoulders tighten, his brow furrows. He doesn't look up, not out of rudeness, but because to him, this wasn't sacred. It was noise. It was desecration. Later, on set, Carrey flips through the air in Riddler's green suit, ad-libbing riddles with comedic flair, adding a spontaneous twirl, a double take. The director loves it. The camera loves it. Even the extras love it. Jones does not. He watches, arms crossed, waiting for the cue. When his turn comes, he hits his marks, delivers his lines like hammers. Clean, heavy, undeniable. There's no room for play. No twirls. Only steel. Only fire. But the tone of the film keeps tilting, leaning more toward Carrey's world than his. The spotlight slowly but surely begins to swing. And perhaps that, more than anything, stung. Flashback again to the restaurant where it all unraveled. Jim Carrey walking in, confident, upbeat, perhaps thinking this was his moment to break the wall, to connect not as Riddler and Two-Face, but as men, as actors, as fellow warriors in a surreal cinematic battlefield. He sees Jones at a corner table, mid-dinner. He approaches with a smile, wide, genuine, a touch hopeful. Jones rises, his face pale, his jaw tight. The moment, slow and cinematic. Carrey extends a hand. And then, those words, "I hate you. I really don't like you. I cannot sanction your buffoonery." Time freezes. The hum of the restaurant fades. For a heartbeat, there's only silence. Carrey withdraws his hand, nods, maybe, walks away. The night resumes, but something changes. Not just between the two men, but inside them. For Jones, the confrontation was a purge. For Carrey, a wound he'd carry quietly, without ever pressing it into the public eye for sympathy. They returned to set, professional, polished. But the tension was etched into every interaction, every joint scene. A silent battle, never shouted, never publicly fought, but deeply, permanently felt. Chapter 5. Climax. The real climax didn't happen on screen. It wasn't when Two-Face cackled maniacally or when the Riddler unleashed his chaos. It wasn't in any explosion or final showdown. It happened in the quiet moments in between, the stares that lingered too long, the silence that stretched just a little too taut. There was a day near the end of filming, a scene where both villains shared the frame, their energies clashing like tidal waves. The script called for synchronized madness, a duet of villainy. The cameras rolled. Carrey, ever explosive, unleashed a fresh interpretation, adding a new gesture, a new vocal tick. The crew chuckled quietly. Schumacher nodded in approval. And Jones? He hit his mark, spoke his line, but his jaw clenched slightly. Just enough, just long enough for those watching to sense that the line between acting and enduring had grown razor thin. He was a man being asked to dance in a circus when he'd signed up for a war film. Still, he never cracked, he never lashed out. Tommy Lee Jones, ever the professional, carried the performance through to the end, but there was no chemistry, no spark, no unity. On camera, the villains teamed up. Off camera, there was frost in the air. For Carrey, it was bewildering. He once reflected, "I was the biggest thing in comedy at the time, and I thought maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe he didn't like that I was rising so fast, or maybe it was just personality." But he never truly found the answer, because Jones never offered one. That one moment in the restaurant, raw, unscripted, unprovoked, was the only glimpse behind the curtain. And perhaps that's what makes it all so haunting. It wasn't an ongoing feud. It wasn't gossip-fueled or media-driven. It was a single, potent moment of rejection. Personal, unfiltered, unforgettable. Tommy Lee Jones, so rarely candid, had spoken the one truth he couldn't bury under stoicism. "I cannot sanction your buffoonery." A phrase that rang like a gavel through Hollywood lore, echoing in interviews and retrospectives long after the film faded from theaters. It became legend, not just for its formality, but for the brutal honesty it contained. Because in those 6 words, Jones revealed more than dislike. He revealed a fracture between two philosophies of acting, a chasm between discipline and chaos, between reverence and rebellion, and that was something no scene, no script, no Hollywood gloss could ever bridge. Chapter 6. Unravel. When the cameras stopped rolling and the final scenes of Batman Forever were locked, both men returned to their respective orbits in the Hollywood sky. Tommy Lee Jones continued his steady march through serious roles: Volcano, Double Jeopardy, U.S. Marshals, playing the gruff, authoritative figures he had mastered. Always dignified, always razor-sharp, always within the tightly controlled boundaries he valued. His public persona remained unchanged. A man who didn't smile unless he meant it, who didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. Jim Carrey, meanwhile, expanded, not just in box office power but in range. He stunned critics with The Truman Show, delivered emotional weight in Man on the Moon, and reached unexpected depths in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. The buffoon grew into an actor of surprising tenderness and complexity. And yet, even as Carrey evolved, the story of Jones's rejection followed him. In interviews, when asked about challenging co-stars or difficult sets, Carrey would sometimes revisit that moment, not with bitterness, but with a kind of curious sadness, not because it was cruel, but because it was so final. It wasn't the kind of Hollywood spat that leads to tabloids or decades-long rivalries. No one was throwing punches or exchanging lawsuits. It was quieter, sharper. A moment frozen in time, a line etched into memory. I cannot sanction your buffoonery. 6 words that encapsulated not just a feeling, but an era ending. An era where actors like Jones, stoic, deliberate, anchored in craft, felt the walls of cinema being reshaped by the loud, the wild, the unpredictable. Jones wasn't wrong, and neither was Carrey. They were 2 sides of the same coin. Ironically, the very symbol that Two-Face flips in his palm. What made Jones bristle made Carrey soar. What made Carrey shine made Jones wince. They needed each other on that film, even if they couldn't stand one another. Their performances, grating and dazzling, oil and fire, made Batman Forever exactly what it was: chaotic, unforgettable, and unlike anything else in the franchise. And long after the credits rolled, the story behind the scenes remained, whispered in green rooms, quoted on Reddit threads, etched into fan memory. Because sometimes the most unforgettable performances aren't the ones in the script. They're the ones no one ever rehearses. They're the ones that happen when 2 great forces meet and realize they were never meant to share the same space. Chapter 7. Echoes After the Spotlight. Years later, Jim Carrey would laugh when he recalled the story. Not a bitter laugh, not even sarcastic, just a soft, knowing chuckle. Like someone remembering a strange dream they'd never quite make sense of. Like someone who understood that, in the grand theater of Hollywood, not every co-star will applaud your performance. Not every handshake will be returned. And Tommy Lee Jones? He never spoke publicly about that night. He never confirmed the words, never denied them. He didn't need to. It wasn't his style to explain. His silence, as always, was the punctuation mark. But if you look closely at Batman Forever, you'll see it. Not in the script, not in the costumes, but in the flicker of a look, the hesitation in a line, the tension in a shared frame. You'll see 2 actors giving their all, just not to each other. You'll see an old guard standing firm against a storm of change. You'll see a man who studied Shakespeare in the shadow of ivy-covered halls, forced to play opposite a man who danced through chaos with a painted grin. And somehow, it worked. Or rather, it clashed perfectly. Because sometimes greatness doesn't come from harmony. Sometimes it comes from dissonance, from 2 titans pulling in opposite directions, stretching a scene until it almost snaps, then holding it, just barely, for the sake of the audience. And when the lights dim and the screen goes black, all that's left is the echo. A phrase immortal in its sharpness, a truth wrapped in formality. I cannot sanction your buffoonery. In a city where masks are currency and performances never end. Those words cut deeper than any scripted insult. They were real. They were raw. And they were a final bow in a story of 2 men who were never meant to play the same tune, but who, for a brief, neon-lit moment, did. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below as it helps support this channel. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.